Hi, I'm Laumani with matrix number 286575 from Management Accounting 1 course code BKAM 2013. Me and my group members will like to discuss ABC costing versus traditional costing. Okay, so what is ABC costing? Traditional costing? What are the differences? Don't worry, we will tell you. Okay, so first of all, ABC stands for activity-based costing and is a method of assigning overhead costs and indirect costs to products and services based on activities carried out to complete their products or services using a few cost pools or cost drivers as allocation basis to the resources and costs. So for example, like production scheduling based on the number of production runs, material handling based on the number of materials moves, and inspecting products based on the number of inspections carried out. Meanwhile, traditional costing allocates overhead costs and indirect costs to products and services based on production resources. Under this method, the costs are usually applied based on either the number of direct labor hours consumed or the machine hours used. And recently, as the manufacturing overhead costs have increased significantly, or the manufacturing overhead costs no longer correlate to the productive machine hours or direct labor hours, ABC has grown in importance compared to traditional costing. This is because resources and costs are allocated to services and products more accurately under the ABC costing. And moreover, the allocation of the cost can be seen clearly among the activities. So now I will pass my session to my classmate to show how the ABC costing works.
Greetings everyone, I am Kausalya Chandran and my matrix number is 280805. So today I am here to discuss about the 7 steps of activity-based costing. To really go into the first steps till the last one, can we have a refresh our mind about activity-based costing system? Okay, what really activity-based costing system is? Activity-based costing system or known as ABC is a costing method based on the actual cost to design, manufacture and sell a product. The company assigns overhead costs, which include direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead, and not forgetting indirect overhead that is associated with the manufacturing of the products. ABC also ensure that per item manufacturing costs are more correct, and ABC allows companies to more accurately determine what the true cost of product is. Moving on to the
As
first step,
everyone know, cost
identify
per
the
unit
products are the
calculation contains
chosen
7
cost
steps.
object. Before
I'll be
that,
explaining
how do
step
you
5 and
identify
forward.
a
Step
cost
5.
object?
Compute the rate per unit of
You will
each cost
identify a
allocation
cost
base
object when
used to
costs are measured
allocate
for products
indirect
or a
cost to the job.
department. You
The
have a cost
predetermined overhead
object,
rate
basically
is
any
based on
item
your
that a
estimate.
company wishes
To
to measure
calculate the rate,
separately
divide the
is the
estimated
cost
overhead
object.
cost by the
Other example
estimated
of
cost
cost
driver
object
amount
include
or
machine,
quantity
customers,
in.
and even
In
employers.
our
To make it
example,
clear
I would
cut,
like to bring Fresh for
let me
Fido
explain the
calculates the
example to
predetermined
identify the
overhead
products
rate
are the
with the
chosen cost
following
object.
calculation.
In order to
Predetermined
provide
overhead
clients with
rate
data
equals the
communication services,
estimated overhead cost
XYZ
divided by
Incorporations
cost driver
manufactured a
amount.
telephone line
In this
that
case,
is
where
used in
predetermined
residential
overhead
and
rate
commercial construction
$30
project.
divided with
In order to assess
12,800
how
labor
much the
hours will
wire
be
would
getting
cost and how much to
2.34,
charge
where
for it, XYZ
it's considered as our
must
predetermined
introduce
overhead
its
rate.
client into newer or more
As
advanced kind
everyone
of
knows, cost per
telephone
unit
wire called
calculation
category
contains 7
6. We
steps.
can
I'll be
in
explaining
summarize
step
we can
5
come
and
up
forward.
as
Step
cat
5.
6. The
Compute the
cost
rate per
object
unit
is the
of
new
each
wire
cost
which we will
allocation
label
base
as cat
used to
6
allocate
C86,
indirect cost
which
to
is
the
the
job.
long form
The
of category
predetermined
6.
overhead
The
rate
thing
is
that
based
need
on
to
your
a cost
estimate. To
attached is the
calculate the
object.
rate, divide the
Again,
estimated
cost object
overhead
is
cost
any
by the
item that the company
estimated
wishes
cost
to
driver
measure
amount
separately
or
of the cost
quantity in.
object. And in
In
this
our
situation, we can
example,
come
I
up
would like
as
to bring
category
Fresh
6
for
is
Fido
the
calculates
cost
the
attached
predetermined
to its
overhead rate
object.
with the following calculation.
Let's move on to our second step, which is figure out the direct cost of the product. The costs that can be directly linked or connected to a product manufacturing are known as its direct costs. They are previously stated as direct materials, direct labor, and manufacturing overhead. I hope these first two steps clear you all, so we can move on to our third step. Moving on to the third step, which is select the activities and cost allocation basis to use for allocating indirect cost to the product. Work out the total overhead for each cost pool. This step requires that overhead cost associated with each activity to be assigned to the activity. Thirdly, the cost pool for purchasing material activity will include costs for items such as salaries of purchasing personnel, rent for purchasing department, office space, and depreciation of office equipment. Fourthly, select the cost allocation base to use for allocating indirect costs to the job, which is direct labor hours, direct labor cost, units, and etc. At this point, we have identified the most important and costly activities required to make products, and we have assigned overhead costs to each of the activities. This step is to find an allocation basis that drives the cost of each activity. The information includes an estimate of the level of activity for each cost driver, which is needed by predetermined rate for each activity. I hope step 3 clears you. Moving on to the fourth step, identify the indirect costs associated with each allocation base. Before that, let me explain what is indirect allocation cost. Indirect cost allocation is an accounting function by which estimates are made to distribute indirect costs to program or functions in order to approximate their full cost. And what makes up an indirect cost allocation base? The most common cost base used to calculate and allocate indirect cost rate are modified total direct cost and total direct salary with or without fringe benefits associated with those salaries. In this case, actual will be calculated actual indirect costs, whereas normal will be calculated budgeted indirect costs. Here are several examples of appropriate allocation base. The computer services department allocates its cost based on the number of personal computers used by each operating department or the by number of service calls to each operating department. Secondly, the human resources department allocate its cost based on the number of employment servement to the operating department. To sum up, identify the indirect costs associated with the each allocation base is need to be referred to the operation companies. What are the objective based and what are the function of the company so that we can come up with a clear justification. We are here with the step 5. Compute the rate per unit of each cost allocation base activity used to allocate indirect cost to the product. In this case, we will be playing with the formulas where actual manufacturing overhead rate equals to actual manufacturing overhead cost divided by actual total quantity of allocation base. When it's come to budgeted manufacturing overhead rate will be equals to budgeted manufacturing overhead cost divided by budgeted total quantity of cost allocation base. Lastly, overhead costs are allocated to products by multiplying the predetermined overhead for each activity. And to justify this step 5, we really need to know the activity and predetermined overhead to compute the rate per unit of each cost allocation base to use to allocate indirect costs to the products. Well, now we'll move on to the sixth step. Compute the indirect costs allocated to the products. Indirect expenses or overhead costs are expenses that apply to more than one business activity. In simple way to say, you cannot apply an indirect cost directly to the production of a specific good or services. Instead, they are costs that go into running your business as a whole. If you want to determine the portion of your indirect cost, then go towards producing certain items you must distribute to the cost. Your indirect expense can be either fixed cost or everyone knows could be as a variable cost as well. In actual, we'll be calculating actual allocation rate times by actual base activity for the job. Lastly, in normal calculation, we'll be going as budgeted allocation rate times by actual base activity for the job. I hope I made a justification to the step 6, which is compute the indirect costs allocated to the products. We are here with the final step, step 7. Compute the total cost of the products by adding all direct and indirect costs assigned to the products. Assigning costs to the products, the final step is the activity-based costing system is to assign the activity cost to the products. We do this just as we have done from other product costing system we have considered. We multiply the cost driver rate by the number of units produced or number of units of the cost driver in each products. I hope I have clearly explained the first step to the seventh step. And in conclusion, what we really need to understand is we need to know the indirect cost, direct labor, and the cost driver, and not forgetting, does this make justice to the activity base and allocation base as well. That's all from me. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nurjala Binti Samsudin. My number matric is 272607. I will explain about the traditional costing. For traditional costing, it used to determine the cost of making products to make a profit, and it is based on allocating overhead manufacturing costs. First step is we need to identify the overhead costs. Overhead costs associated with production that do not directly impact the product. They can include manufacturing and non-manufacturing expenses. For example, let's consider Company A is a small company that sells food. The company has a modest factory space, so the overhead costs for the company include utilities for the factory and maintenance staff wages. Second, we need to estimate the overhead cost for a specific time period. We might estimate this cost for a quarter, month, or year. For example, the owner of Company A estimates the overhead cost for the year to be 30,000. And then we choose a cost driver to use in the calculations. The cost driver should be linked significantly to production, like machine hours for highly automated production. Taking into account that Company A prepares the food by hand, so the company selects labor hours as their cost driver. And then step 4 is estimate an amount for the cost driver for the appropriate period. The estimated period for the cost drivers should match the time period you choose for the overhead cost estimate. For example, like labor hours per quarter. Next, you calculate the predetermined overhead rate. To predetermine overhead rate based on your estimates. To calculate the rate, estimate overhead cost divided by estimated cost driver amount. Lastly, you should apply the overhead rate to products. Multiply your chosen metric by the predetermined overhead rate to determine the estimated overhead cost for a product. That's all from me. I will pass to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lime Jie and my metric number is 279558. I will going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages for activity-based costing system versus traditional costing system. The advantages of ABC system. ABC system is good for companies that manufacture multiple products, so it means that companies that manufactures a large number of different products is prefer an ABC system because it can provide a more accurate cost data for each product. With activity-based allocation of overhead costs, it is more easier to identify the areas where the expenses are being wasted on unprofitable products. This is because an ABC system uses activity-based drivers. So, what it means? This system creates new bases to allocate overhead costs like machining, delivery, setup, and so on. In addition, multiple cost driver rates is very useful for management and performance appraisal, and also this system also can be used to design and assisting on new products based on the cost information. Based on the result, a company can identify the behavior of overhead costs in detail. By allocating overhead costs using ABC system can provide more accurate and clear data for a company. I have to emphasize this because the allocation of indirect costs can recognize the root causes for each indirect cost, which is its means to the activities drivers. So, ABC system can help a company to make a better strategy decision and pricing decision by using a more reliable product cost data. And also, this can help a company to find a more cheaper methods of production. Although this activity-based system is beneficial to companies that contains larger costs, but it also have its disadvantages, like this system needs a lot of available, reliable, and sufficient data. This is because sometimes the companies may not ready and available to provide all the data that needed by this system. On the other hand, the reports using by this system to collect data do not always follow the traditional guidelines of accounting principles, so it sometimes can make the things become more harder to track for some teams. The second disadvantages for activity-based costing system is time and cost consuming. The complicated calculation steps includes the steps of dividing and recognizing the activities into different variables. So it can help them to calculate the more accurate data for each indirect cost. Well, the cost consuming means the company may need to hire specific team to handle the specific allocation costing system, like the activity-based costing system, because they also need to buy and purchase some specific software to do the allocation cost. So this system is not suitable for the small company, because these small companies usually have small overhead costs. This is because after they use this system, they may find that this system is not as efficient as other options like traditional costing system due to insufficient data. So it may lead to low efficiency of calculating the production cost. Traditional costing system is more easier to understand because the element and the principles of this system goes against with the activity-based costing system. In the side of traditional costing system, the company may find that this method is more easier than the activity-based costing system because it is also easy to implement to allocate the cost. This is because all the procedures of traditional costing system are not complicated at all, like the calculation and data collection steps. Since this allocation system is more easier to implement and understand, so the company do not need to hire a specific teams to do the allocation steps and the calculation. So the companies can save a lot. So the traditional costing system is best for manufacturers that only manufactures a few different products with simple preparation steps to allocate the overhead costs. Disadvantages of traditional costing system. The advantages of this system is obviously because the main differences between the traditional costing system and ABC system is that traditional costing system use units or volume-based drivers. So there's a risk of this system because the cost may not be allocated entirely or properly, that actually the activity consumes the cost. This system is using only volume measures like the direct labor cost and the machine hours. Secondly, the traditional costing system will only provide less accurate cost information. This is because this system using the less detailed information, so it cannot provide enough and accurate cost information for manager to identify the cost reduction. In general, both methods are oversight a lot because the ABC system provide more accurate data, while the traditional costing system provide less accurate data. This is because the drivers that use are different at all. ABC system use activity-based drivers, while the traditional costing system use volume-based. So, for the ABC system, this system use a lot of cost and time to do the cost allocation, while the traditional costing system is more easier and cheaper to implement since the preparation steps are simple.